We are in Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14. And we're in the final week of the life of Jesus before the crucifixion. When you get to chapter 14, since chapter 11, Jesus has been right there in Jerusalem. Now, every night, he's in Jerusalem during the day, and then at night, he goes to a little village called Bethany. You might remember who lives in Bethany. Who lived in Bethany? Lazarus lived in Bethany, and Mary and Martha. And he just loved, he didn't stay in Jerusalem. Now, it was a very packed time. It was the time when Jerusalem's filled because of the Passover week. But he's going in and out. But Mark, up until chapter 12, 11 and 12, Mark has been recording everything, since Mark chapter 11, and into chapter 14 and 15, as we go in there, Mark is rapidly recording everything that Jesus is saying and doing, because this is the most important part. When we read the Gospel of Mark, we are focusing on his death, burial, and resurrection. Not just on his teaching. Jesus' teaching is the best teaching ever. But his teaching doesn't save, does it? He could not just be a good teacher. Do you understand what I'm saying? His perfect life doesn't save. It had to be his perfect death, his burial and resurrection. So Mark is picking up, and from chapter 11, chapter 12, chapter 13, 14, 15, it's all about that final week of Christ and Jerusalem and the interaction with people and everything that's going on, because that's the pinnacle. That's what changes our view of our sin, that what Jesus came to do was die. So it's Tuesday evening, and Jesus has his apostles and a few other disciples prepare the Passover meal for them a day early. Did you ever think of that? They are going to prepare the Passover meal for Jesus and themselves actually a whole day earlier than everybody else was. You might know why. Because he was going to be dead on the Passover day. That's where he dies. So he'll be dead for the Passover day. So if he's going to have it, which he is going to, he's going to do it a day earlier. And we'll pick up in Mark chapter 14 and verse 12. Mark 14 and verse 12. Just looking at the first verse, we're just going to look at about 10 verses here. And I'm calling this an early Passover meal because it is a day early. And I'll explain a little bit more why that's important. So in verse 12, it says, "In the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto him, Where wilt thou that we should go and prepare that thou mayest eat the Passover?" So what is the Passover? Anybody want to tell me, what is the Passover? That we eat the Passover. What is that? Bill? Good. The lamb is a big deal of it, yes. And, yes, Marcus? Excellent. So, but that's not what was going to happen at this point. It was a celebration of what did happen. So it's a memorial, okay? They are remembering the Passover by eating the Passover, having another meal like they had in their homes when they were slaves in Egypt. So God delivered the Jewish people without an army, without weapons, but just by the blood of the Lamb. It broke the back of the Egyptian army. The death of the firstborn was the final of the 10 plagues, the 10 disasters. They came along, and it's what got Pharaoh to say, "Get out, I don't want to see you anymore, you're free." And it's just, the Jews never could have fought and won their own freedom. God had to do it. And he did it through that lamb. It's all described in Exodus chapter 12, which is really an incredible thing. If you're ever reading through your Bible, I hope you are, and you come to Exodus chapter 12, pay attention to the details in the experience of that night. Think about it. They are being pressurized on every point. Pharaoh was not letting them go, and yet here they are singing, and they are enjoying this meal. And darkness comes upon the entire country of Egypt, 3 days of darkness. And then it gets a little bit light, and then they're told, eat this meal, and you're going to be free at midnight. And so now Moses tells them that, and then they believe it. And so they sit down and they begin to sing while Egypt is in terror, while the world was about to be judged. And so when the Jews sit down and they memorialize the Passover, they did it with joy. They're remembering, this was our victory. This was our Declaration of Independence and our War of Independence all in one. They were free from that moment. So now the Feast of Unleavened Bread was a whole week of which the Passover was a part of. So for a whole week, they were supposed to go through the house and get rid of any yeast, anything that was leaven, and it was a celebration of holiness to God. They were clearing out, because yeast is a symbol of sin, they were clearing out anything that would affect the bread or grape juice or anything. They're clearing out that yeast, and for a whole week, they just ate plain flat bread. And it was a symbol to remind them, stay simple. Don't get involved in all the world goings on. Don't let sin build up in your life. Clear out and stay simple in your walk with God. So all the cooking had to be leaven-free, and we like leaven. We use leaven. We like fluffy bread. Now, in our world, we're very unhealthy, but in most of the world where they deal with health, they have something called sauerkraut and different types of vegetables that have been, we call it soured, but it's actually, they have been fermented with yeast and with different things that make it healthy. Your gut needs it. Well, at this point, for that entire week, they have none of that, and all the food was bland. So he asked his disciples, or his disciples asked him, where do you want us to go and prepare that thou mayest eat the Passover? And there were 5 things that were prepared for the Passover. One of them was called bitter herbs. Usually it was horseradish or even raw horseradish. And I don't like, there's certain kinds of lettuce. I don't like rocket lettuce. Maybe it's rocket lettuce or some other kinds of lettuce. It's a very bitter type of lettuce that you get. Is rocket lettuce what I'm thinking of? I don't know what it is. But some people love it. And it's like, ugh. But that's a little bit like a bitter herb that they would have had. Unleavened bread, unleavened, which means non-alcoholic wine. And they had a bowl of what's called a sop. You ever hear of something that's sopping wet? All right, sopping means it's for dunking, it's for getting something saturated. And it was basically salt water. And you would take your bread and you would dip it in that and you would eat the bread because they didn't have a lot of butter or whatever, I'm not sure. And then they had the roasted lamb. So those 5 things may not be not much to you and me, but they exercised all 5 senses of a Jewish child especially. It was the taste, the bitter taste. You ever had your kids say, can I have the lemon? And then they get the lemon and they put it in their mouth, they start sucking on it, and then they go, whoa. They're experiencing that tart sourness of lemon. Well, the children were tasting those bitter herbs, and then the dad would laugh and says, that reminds us of the bitterness of our slavery when we were in Egypt. Oh, okay. And then the unleavened bread, the flat bread, and he says, Daddy, this is very plain bread. He says, that's right, because this is how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be simple in our life, not filled with the leaven of sin and of all the world around us. The non-alcoholic wine, fresh grape juice, the salt water, dipping the bread in that bowl, symbolizing that saltiness of, again, just the life was hard, and then the roasted lamb, that a substitute, something had to give its life so that they could be freed. So they have tastes, they have smells, they are together as a family. Isn't it wonderful when the family gets together? Sometimes it's only at Christmas. But when the whole family's together, there is a joy there. They are telling and hearing the Exodus story. They're singing several of the psalms that are about the Passover. And then they eat that lamb. And that all connects them together as a people. You ever wonder why the Jews seem to be able to retain their identity? It's because of the Passover and the Sabbath. They even if they're atheistic, even if they don't believe in God, they still come together and they go through those memorials, and it just binds them as the Jewish people. Now in verse 13, it says, and he, Jesus, sendeth forth two of his disciples, and saith unto them, go ye into the city, and there shall meet you a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him. And wheresoever he shall go in, say ye to the good men of the house, the master saith, where is the guest chamber, where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us. All right, what's so special about this? Number one, they're going into a crowded city. It is evening. They're going into a crowded city. People are rushing to get indoors and stuff. And they'll meet a man running around with a jug of water. Maybe it's on his shoulders, or maybe he's carrying it heavy or whatever. What would be unusual about that? Wouldn't you see a lot of men carrying water? No, usually that was women were carrying the water, men were carrying crops or bread or whatever they might have been doing. So to meet a man, that guy would stand out. Would you agree? So you meet a man, and then wherever he's going, follow him. Now, can you imagine this guy? He's got two guys following him as he's trying to get back to his home. And he keeps looking over his shoulder, and these two guys following him. And then when they finally catch up to him, they say, where is the good man of the house? Meaning the owner. And the good man, which the Bible refers to him as, will come down, and then the disciples are supposed to say, the master needs a room. And what would be amazing is he will show them, take them to what kind of a room? What's it called? An upper room. Does anybody know where the upper room comes in again? Say? This is where the Last Supper is going to be held, yes. And so all the way through Acts chapter 2, and maybe even later, the upper room, they don't seem to leave. Once they are from the Last Supper on, that place is special. And so they're going back to that room. The owner of the house probably just dedicates and says, you guys can have this upper room. How many people will ultimately fit in that upper room? Anybody want to take a guess? 120 will fit in that room. Now, I don't know how many fit in your house. I don't think 120 will fit in your house. What do you think, Hannah? No. So this has to be a substantial room. To fit in this room 120 people comfortable is kind of hard. So I don't think it was this big, because they would all be sitting on the floor or sitting in the windowsill. They would be kind of quite squished. But let's say it's about 2/3 the size of this room. That's the size of this upper room. And what's unique about it is it's already prepared. Did you notice that? He will show you a large upper room furnished. It has everything they need. I think that he's already got the lamb. I think he's already got the fresh grape juice. He's got the bread baked and stuff. And just the disciples are going to go in there and going, what's left for us to do? They're just going to lay out the place settings, and they're going to wait for Jesus and his disciples to come, which is kind of cool. Does that speak that this is a thrown together event, or that God has made sure everything's coming together right for the Last Supper? And Jesus never panics in any of the events that we're looking at. He says, you'll find a room prepared for us. And it's like, and there it is. Because this is a plan. Remember, the crucifixion is not a tragedy. It's not an accident. The crucifixion is the plan of God, and everything's coming to. Isn't it nice just when somebody's already been ahead of you and done a lot of preparing, and you kind of just walk into it? So they begin to prepare the Passover meal, and now you know what Michelangelo painted. I mean, can you imagine? He had to lay on his back. How many weeks was he painting? Anybody remember the actual? They had a scaffolding up at the top of the Sistine Chapel, and he's on his back painting the Last Supper and all of the stuff up there. But he's painting this next event that we're reading about. So it jumps now to one very important thing, verse 17. Verse 16, I think I read there, and his disciples went forth, came into the city, found as he had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover. And in the evening he cometh with the 12. And as they sat and did eat, Jesus said, verily I say unto you, one of you which eateth with me shall betray me. There's that word again. Now, early on in chapter 14, we know that Judas has already gone ahead and said, I will look for an opportunity to betray Jesus. But here now, Jesus is announcing, I know somebody's going to betray me. Verse 19, and they began to be sorrowful and to say with him one by one, what are the next three words? Is it I? Would I do that to you, Lord? And another said, is it I? Could it be me? Is it me? And he answered and said unto them, it is one of the 12 that dippeth with me in the dish. Now just stop there for a second. Again, I'm going to remind you, it is Tuesday evening. It's less than 24 hours until Jesus goes to the tomb, and he'll be in the tomb by Wednesday evening, and he says, this is it. We're down to the wire. I will be betrayed by someone in this room. That would freak anybody out. One of you, my very closest disciples, one of my sent ones or apostles, what you might want to call. Now, as I said last week, to betray means to deliver into the hands of an enemy someone that trusted you. To put somebody into a problem, or that you abandoned to a problem when they trusted you to protect them. It means also, when we say betray, it's to expose someone's vulnerability in order to personally succeed at their expense. If you've ever been on the job and you were talking to one of your workmates and you were telling them about your problems with the computer and your problems with your coworkers and your problems with the boss, but you thought it was just between you and them, and then they went and they told your boss, and then your boss fired you. That's a betrayal, wouldn't it be? That's just a small taste of exactly how Jesus is going to be betrayed. So they all realized, all of a sudden realized that someone was about to make Jesus an easy target for the authorities. As I said last week, Jesus was constantly on the move. Jesus never stayed in one place, and when he was somewhere, he was always surrounded by crowds of people. He was safe. But if somebody's going to betray him, it would be somebody who would know when he's just with his few, and he would be vulnerable, and it would be nighttime, and he could just quietly disappear. So it was amazing that the disciples and the apostles actually all said, "Is it I?" Now, what do I call that? I call that self-awareness. So can I encourage you, I know I'm talking to the choir, but when the Bible is preached, when the Bible is read, when the Holy Spirit brings something to your mind about a sin, a temptation, a trouble going on, and instead of you going, oh, I knew that they would fall, instead of, why don't you say, Lord, what could I end up doing? Would it be me that could do such a horrible thing? Could I be like David? I mean, when you read about David and his sin with Bathsheba, don't be so judgmental of David until you've judged yourself first. Does that make sense? Because it was easy for David, and believe me, it's even more easy for us. So if we had a church full of people who every time the Bible was preached, we all sat there and said, Lord, are you talking to me? Am I the one that you're talking about? Is this my sin that I need to get right? We'd have a great church then. Because self-awareness is one of the most important things for a Christian to have instead of self-righteousness. You see the difference? Self-righteousness deflects and says, oh, well, I know my husband, he's got the problem. Oh, my wife, she's always the problem. Or, oh, you just don't know what it's like with my boss. And when you're deflecting, that's self-righteousness. But when you say, Lord, are you talking to me? Am I the one that would do that to you? So the rule is be careful not to protect yourself, and especially your heart and your emotions. The only way to heal a hard heart is by letting God break it. Take your Bible, hold your place here, go to Psalm 34. Psalm 34. So what did I just say? What is the only way to heal a hard heart? Well, I don't know how to break my own heart, but I need to let God break it through the Word of God or through the trouble that I get in. Psalm 34 in verse 18, yes, there, Psalm 34, 18 says this. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a... So God is close to somebody who has a broken heart, and saveth such as of a contrite spirit. So, all right, contrite. Anybody know what contrite means? Lowly, not really. It's usually associated with loneliness. All right. Do you hear the word contraction? Contrite means small. Instead of puffed up, full of pride, it's a small heart. You have no pride. You have nothing to prove. So the only way for God to heal a hard heart is for God to break your heart and put it back in size as it should be. I'll show you another one. Psalm 51. Psalm 51, 17. This is what saved David's life after he sinned with Bathsheba. Psalm 51 and 17. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart, O God, thou wilt not despise. So, when the disciples were all asking, is it I, is it I, is it I? What kind of heart did they have? Soft, small. They were not proud. They weren't going, oh, I bet you it's Judas. Oh, well, my money's on Peter. I bet you he's going to betray. That would have been really bad. But instead of them pointing the finger at anybody, they looked at themselves. And a church full of people who are pointing at one another will kill each other. But a church full of people who ignore everyone else and says, Lord, speak just to me. If I am the problem, I want to be right. That's a great church. So Jesus then says, and kind of go back to Mark chapter 14, verse 20, he says something quite remarkable. 14:20, and he, Jesus, answered and said unto them, it is one of the 12. Now, I want you to take a step back and realize he had sent 2 disciples to go and find this place and to set up. The 12 are with him. So there's more people in that upper room than just the 12 apostles. There are other disciples. There are disciples that were not apostles. I want you to understand that he actually doesn't say, oh, it's one of the fringe. It would have been easy to accept an enemy of Jesus being at the back of the room, being barely there, just one of the fringe of the group with Jesus. But Jesus says, it's one of you 12. Can you imagine that? Jesus said it was somebody so close that they had been dipping their own bread with him in the sop dish. So it's that close. Now, who was close to Jesus at the Last Supper? Anybody? We know John was, because he's actually leaning on his chest there. Who else was probably near him? Probably Peter and James. And there was one other guy, Judas. That's kind of unusual. I mean, if I'm planning somebody's demise, I wouldn't be close to Jesus, right? I wouldn't be sitting close to my enemy there. But Judas is right there. I don't think Judas knew how much he had yielded to a demonic spirit. And he's there not thinking that anything he's about to do is really that bad. That's what sin will do to you. It will always blind you to the potential effects. So, this person who's about to betray Jesus is so close to him. It'd be like finding out there is a murderer in this room. I mean, you'd all be, maybe not looking at your wife or your husband, but you'd be looking across and I wonder if it's so-and-so. And then Jesus says, it's the one right here that's been dipping with me in this. I mean, that's how serious it was when Jesus announces who it was. Psalm 41. I need you to go back there. 2 other scriptures here. Psalm 41 and verse 9. This is all prophesied And what is amazing is every Jewish reader never saw this until it happened to Jesus. Psalm 41 in verse 9. Yea, mine own familiar friend, in whom I trusted, which did eat of my, what's the next word? Psalm 41, 9. Which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. He's trying to crush me. Show you another one. Go to Psalm 55. My own familiar friend, a friend that I treated like family. Psalm 55 and verse 12. For it was not an enemy that reproached me. Then I could have borne it. I could have carried it. I could have dealt with it. Neither was it he that hated me that did magnify himself against me. Then would I have hid myself from him. It would have been easier if it was my blatant enemy, verse 13. But it was thou, a man mine equal, my guide, mine acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together. We talked all the time, and we walked into the house of God in company. We were always together. Let death seize upon them, and let them go down quick into hell, for wickedness is in their dwellings, and among them. He refers to Judas and anybody like him. But he says, it would have been nice if it was an enemy, but instead it was my own apostle, one of my friends. Verse 21 in Mark chapter 14, we'll finish this. And I wanted to, the final point is, it was no surprise to Jesus that there was a betrayer in his midst. Verse 21 says, the Son of Man indeed goeth, as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. Good were it for that man if he had never been born. So everything that was happening was prophesied and planned by God. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 2. 1 Corinthians chapter 2. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 6. Down to 8, it says this. 1 Corinthians 2, 6. Howbeit we speak wisdom among them that are perfect. Those are the saved. Yet not the wisdom of this world. We don't use the fancy words of this world, nor the princes of this world that come always to naught. Everything that the politicians promise never comes true. Verse 7, but we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory. So God ordained and commanded something would happen way out in the future, in our time, which, verse 8, which none of the princes of this world knew, for had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. The point is this. God, before the world ever began, declared how it would happen. And I'll show you another scripture. Go to 1 Peter chapter 1. It uses the same words. 1 Peter, after Hebrews, 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 18. I don't know if you realize how much you save yourself from a lot of trouble when you read the Bible and you believe the Bible. If the princes, if the chief priest and if Pilate and Herod had read their Bible, if the normal Jewish people had read and believed their Bible, they would have said, no, wait a minute. All this stuff seems to match what was prophesied by David, what was prophesied by Isaiah, what was prophesied by so on and so forth, so on and so forth. But they didn't know, therefore it all came to pass like it normally would. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 18. For as much as you know that ye were not redeemed with corruptible things, you're not saved with corruptible things, as silver and gold from your vain conversation, received by tradition from your fathers. That's not what saved you, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot, who verily, here's the truth, was foreordained before the foundation of the world, but was manifest in these last times for you, who by him do believe in God that raised him up from the dead and gave him glory, that your faith and your hope might be in God. Stuck in there in verse 20, it says that everything that Jesus did and everything that happened to Jesus was predetermined by God, described in the Old Testament, in prophecies, and there it happened. So was Jesus sort of freaked out when all this was happening? Not at all. Should you be freaked out when you see the world coming apart or coming together, whichever way you want to look at it? Should we be freaked out? When persecution comes against us, and it's coming, should we freak out and panic? No. Folks, whatever happens, we should be way ahead of it. That doesn't mean we're going to escape trouble. See, we always want to escape trouble. We always want there to be no trouble, no problems. But when problems come, pressures come, troubles come, and it all goes south, Jesus said, look up, because redemption's on its way. It's almost over, all right? So here's the application. All of it was according to God's plan. There are no surprises. Betrayal, abandonment by those you rely on, persecution and abuse of Jesus by the authorities that were meant to protect him. I mean, the whole purpose of the authorities is to protect the individual's rights. They weren't there that day. Murder is part of God's plan? Yes. Second thing of application, Judas was not aware that Jesus was aware. Even Judas, according to Matthew, Judas says, Master, is it I? And Jesus said, thou sayest. What you do, you better do quickly. And Judas got up, and he didn't give it a second thought that he realized Jesus knows what I'm about to do. Look how blind he has become to the sin that he has given himself to. Sin is like, Tony always does the example there in 12 Weeks to Freedom. He has somebody sit down and they hold a rope, and the longer that you allow that sin to be in your life and to just be something you tolerate and then you enjoy, the more you get wrapped up in it, and then you're bound to it. And Judas is completely enslaved to this obsession with that money. He's not thinking about anything else. Third point application is all the apostles feared failing Jesus, and that's a good thing. There was nobody who said, not me, I would never do that. We do know somebody later on who said that, didn't he? Who was it that said, I would never deny you? Yeah, don't say that. I hear people say stuff all the time. Oh, I would never do that. Oh, I will stay true. And I say, don't say that. There have been people, better people than you and me, who under pressure have collapsed. Don't think that you're so above and better than everybody else. All the apostles feared failing Jesus. Fourthly, Judas has freely chosen to betray Jesus. He has freely chosen money over his Savior. But Judas has sealed his own fate. He will die a suicidal death, and he's damned for all eternity. Never got born again. Isn't that a shame? Isn't that a shame? So this is that early dinner. Next week we will actually go through his Last Supper. Which is more important for us to observe, the Passover or the Lord's Remembrance Supper? Which one is more important for us? Yeah, amen. His Last Supper is not the Passover. His Last Supper is a bit of bread and a bit of juice and a whole lot of self-introspection saying, you did all of this for me. You were the lamb, but you're my Savior now. And that's why we have the Lord's Supper about every 2 months, and because it's the biggest deal of all. All right. So, any questions? I like the Gospel of Mark. All right. Bill, you come on up.